Good evening. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Cristian Panaite, and I'm the Associate Curator of Exhibitions at the New York Historical Society. And today we have with us Bob Barsotti, the President of the Bill Graham Memorial Foundation, and Bonnie Simmons, Executive Director of the Foundation. Bob was a producer at the Bill Graham Presents for 30 years, the General Manager of the Winterland Arena, co-creator of the Grateful Dead camping concerts, and a producer of the Amnesty International concerts, among many others. Bonnie has been involved in the music world for over 50 years, from program director at KSAN in San Francisco in the 70s to Warner Brothers Records, and audio director for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when the museum was first built. We are excited to have you here with us for Curator Confidential, a live virtual program presented exclusively for members and other supporters of our organization, while our museum remains closed to the public. Before we begin tonight's discussion, we want to say thank you to all of our trustees, our Chairman's Council, and all of our members and other donors for your generosity. Your support allows New York Historical to continue to pursue our mission to make history matter. So thank you. Today's program, Bill Graham and the Rock and Roll Revolution, will last about 45 minutes, and including time for questions. The questions, you can all submit them via the Q&A function on the Zoom screen at any point during the presentation. We have disabled the chat function, so please do make sure to use the Q&A. Bill Graham and the Rock and Roll Revolution is organized and circulated by the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles in association with the Bill Graham Memorial Foundation, and made possible by the support of Alex Graham, David Graham, and Danny Shear. It's been an incredible honor for me to be the coordinating curator of this exhibition at New York Historical Society and to arrange it for its New York presentation. So Bonnie and Bob, thank you for being here. I think we're all ready to rock and roll, right?
Thank you. It's nice to be here. We appreciate you doing this program.
I see yes, I'm the only one wearing a Winterland t-shirt over here. So I don't know, Bob, I was expecting you to do.
I chose to represent Oakland, California today, although you can't quite see it.
And I'm representing my hometown of Laytonville, California, if you can see it.
Well, I guess before we start talking about the Bill as the man who revolutionized the rock and roll world, the man who was called Lion by Carlos Santana, and I think a mix of Al Capone and Mother Teresa. I think that's how the actor Peter Coyote referred to him. I think we have to go back to his early years. Not many people know that he was actually a refugee from Nazi Germany. Between 1938 and 1941, when he finally arrived in New York, there was an incredible, strenuous, arduous journey. His mother had put him in a Kinderheim in 1938 to protect him. Later on, he was on his way to a chateau outside Paris, and finally, through the International Red Cross and an organization for adopting Jewish children, he made his way to New York in 1941. So I wanted to first listen to a clip of Bill talking about these early years. That way, the audience has a chance to hear him, listen to him, and then Bonnie, if you wouldn't mind talking a little about how you came across Ralph Moritz, one of his best friends, and the famous Fillmore apple barrel and all that, and we'll tie it all together. So, but first, let's listen to Bill.
From the day that I came here, I was 11. I have total amnesia for the first 9 years of my life. I remember nothing except that I left Germany in 1939 as an exchange student with, there's a children's orphanage right outside of Paris in Chaumont. So from 1939 to 1941, I spent the war year, the French-German War, right outside of Paris. But prior to that, there's no memory of my sisters, who 2 of them are here now and 2 are in Europe, have told me about the childhood, but there was no direct memory of any kind until I was 9 years old. Everybody has war stories, and I'll make this one short.
Okay.
As they came, they just, because all the children were Jewish, and the Red Cross sent one person, and we just, it's just retreat in carts and in trains, and whatever way you can. We made our way to Marseille, and in Marseille, they put us on the cattle car to, we went through the Pyrenees, to Barcelona, from Barcelona to Madrid, Madrid to Lisbon, and Lisbon we were put on a freighter to Casablanca, Casablanca to Dakar, and in September of '41 we went via Cuba to New York, and I was put into a foster home organization in Pleasanton, New York.
So there he is. In multiple interviews, he pretty much says he has amnesia about the first 9 years of his life. And Bonnie, how did you come across his best friend early on when you started working on this exhibition?
Thanks, Christian. About 10 years ago, we decided to do a smaller, heartfelt version of the exhibit that hopefully all of you will see someday when you come to the New York Historical, when they're able to reopen. And in researching that, I took on doing the wall that contained any of the stuff about Bill's childhood. When Bill arrived here in America, reportedly he had a yarmulke and a prayer book, and that was all. So there were no artifacts from which to build. So I did what anybody does in 2010 at that time. And I went online in the middle of the night and I started researching, trying to find some pictures of the places that the kids were kept while they made their journey between Germany to Paris and then various places in the French countryside. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I came upon a website that was someone's Shoah testimony. And there was something that caught me and I started reading it. And I realized when I got to the end and I got to the last page and there was the picture of Bill and a fellow named Ralph Moritz that you see on the left on the screen. And it said, somebody told me that my friend Wolfie, with whom I spent all of my life from the time I was 6 in a German orphanage until I came to America at age 11, changed his name years ago and became a music promoter, and his name is Bill Graham. So I tried to find him, and sadly, by the time I tried to find him, Bill Graham had passed away. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I looked and I realized this fellow must be at least 80 years old. And I just crossed my fingers and hoped that he was still with us. And I emailed him. And I explained what I was doing. And the next morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang and somebody said, hi, this is Ralph. Are you looking for me? And Ralph Moritz turned out to be someone who, unlike Bill, treated the way that he was most comfortable looking back at his early life was to research extensively and try to figure out every step of everything that had happened to them. He found other kids that were on kinder transport over the years. And he was the most wonderful fella, and he turned over all of his archives to me so that we could use what we needed to. We had the lists of the kids from the ship transcripts. We had pictures of them with the Red Cross workers, pictures of them at school, pictures of them playing, and you will see many of these when you actually see the full exhibit.
Right. So we have a lot of material in the show, and we have the interview, Ralph's own words about Bill and him arriving and seeing the Statue of Liberty and stuff. And then Bill and him being placed in Pleasantville, upstate, in the cottage. And I think it took 9 weeks or so for Bill to be adopted by a family from the Bronx, right? He was the last child to be adopted from that transport.
You know, one of the funny things about Ralph, who was not a fellow to hold back, although he had a lovely way about him, was to pretty point blank tell me, you know, I know Bill said he didn't really remember, but the things that Bill thinks he remembered, most of them were wrong. And Ralph then proceeded to lay out the entire journey that they had in great detail for us. And even to the point that he challenged that when Bill said that he was in really terrible shape and was the last kid to actually get adopted of the kids that were in the orphanage in New York, upstate New York at that time, Ralph said, no, I was in much worse shape than Bill, and I was actually the last kid.
A bit of a competition.
But after we got to know Ralph a little bit by phone and by email, Bob and his wife had occasion to go down and actually meet Ralph for the first time for any of us. Bob, you might want to tell them a little bit about your trip down to see Ralph the first time.
Well, yeah, as soon as I heard about Ralph, I wanted to go meet him. So I was heading to Southern California on some business, and I made arrangements to meet him one afternoon. And my wife, Susie, and I went and sat with him, and I met him at a public golf course restaurant because he was kind of wary about who we were, and he just wanted to be in a public place. And when he came walking in his gym shorts and t-shirt with his bowed legs, I looked at him and I went, oh my God, that looks like Bill's stance, because Bill had the same bowed legs from having rickets when they were kids. Anyway, he came in, and after a few minutes of talking, he realized I was very close with Bill, and he opened up and told me the story of their traveling from Germany to America. And it was a well-researched story that he'd spent a long time finding out. And boy, it was full of detail that Bill never had. And it was just a treasure to be able to talk to Ralph and to get to know him as Bill's childhood friend, because it gave me a little insight into who Bill was when he was small.
So fast forward.
Anyway, he did tell the story about going out at the when the times got tough at the chateau and they needed food. The kids would send Bill and Ralph out to steal apples from the next door neighbors, and they'd go out at night and they'd fill up their shirts with apples, and they'd come back, and that was all the food they had the last few weeks they were at the chateau. And I asked Ralph, what color were the apples? And he said, oh, they were only red. There were no other color apples. Well, Bill had this thing about serving only red apples at the Fillmore. He wouldn't accept yellow or green apples. And he never said anything about where that came from, but we found out that afternoon.
And every show that Bill did at the Fillmore has always had an apple barrel. Originally, the apple barrel at the Fillmore, there was a sign that said, take one or two. And as you would come up the steps of the Fillmore, along with the greeter who was always there to say hello and welcome you to the building, you would see this big apple barrel full of red apples and know that you were somewhere that was a little bit different from most of the other places that you were going.
And the same barrel is does welcome you to the entrance in the exhibition. So that's great. Now, there these like 10, 15 years, the early adulthood, so to speak, when, you know, he serves in the Korean War. He travels a lot between New York and Paris and Vienna, and then goes on the West Coast, and he keeps having this dream of being an actor. And for anyone out there, everyone watching, if you want to watch The Gardens of Stone or Bugsy, great movies in which Bill makes cameos. So around in the early 60s, he finally decides he's going to move to San Francisco, and he gets involved with the San Francisco Mime Troupe, right? And it's there actually that he discovers his passion or his talent for assembling concerts. It's through these concerts, these appeal parties meant to fundraise for the theater group. I just want to play a clip of him talking about this, talking about how he started to run concerts and how he sees himself as the man in charge. Because I feel like this early experience, of course, informed his growth at the Fillmore and then further on.
Now, I always felt that someone had to relate to reality. That was me. somebody had to try to make sure that things went okay. Now, that was always a big argument with a lot of people. Bill, why don't you relax? Why don't you just dig it? Well, when things were okay, I relaxed and I dug it and I enjoyed it. But if somebody had to make sure that things were running okay and on schedule, because some people who wanted to be loose, they might not care. Well, I don't care if the show goes on late. Well, what about the other 3,000 people? You may not care, but I think they care and I care.
In talking with many of our visitors, I get to live vicariously through everyone's memories since I wasn't. There's always, there are often observations about his care towards not only the artists, but in particular the audience, and making sure everyone is safe and everyone is having a great time. Do you think the Trips Festival kind of put him on this path? Once the Grateful Dead and everyone tried to dose him with acid in 66.
Bob, what do you think?
Well, you know, I'm not sure if that was the thing that kicked it in. I think what kicked it in was him realizing it was a business and everyone else was treating it as kind of a pastime. And he jumped into it wholeheartedly. And his whole thing was, if you're running a business, you have to take care of your customers. They're the number one. And that was, he would hammer that into all of us as we started working for him, is the most important thing is what happens to the person when they walk in that door and hand you their ticket. So it was just part of his DNA, and he made it all part of our DNA as well.
Now, when he moved to the Fillmore in early 1966, there was there was a bit of trouble with getting the license from the city, because the venue was in an African-American neighborhood, and I guess the city officials were not fans of having white audiences go in that part of town. Bonnie, you know well the story behind Bill securing finally the license for the Fillmore. Do you mind sharing a little about that?
No, I'm happy to. In 1965, when Bill was the business manager for the Mime Troupe, an extraordinary guerrilla theater group who to this day still exist in San Francisco, which is a remarkable story in itself, were busted during a performance in Lafayette Park in San Francisco, and they got busted for obscenity for something within their show. And Bill realized that he had to go raise money for them because they needed to form a legal defense fund. So he put on that first show and then realized that he needed to do more and needed a larger place. And Ralph Gleason, a very well-known and well-respected writer here in the Bay Area, suggested to him that he try the Fillmore. So he went to the Fillmore, and the fellow that had the dance hall license at the Fillmore at the time was a black music promoter who was doing big R&B shows, James Brown and Temptations and lots of blues shows. And he was a fellow named Charles Sullivan. And Bill went and met Charles, and they struck up a friendship that lasted until until Charles was sadly murdered early in 1966. But Charles let Bill use his license. And then a few months later, when Bill was actually starting to do more shows there, Charles suggested that he better go get his own license, because Charles was sensing that the city was getting kind of uncomfortable with this, you know, number of young hipster and hippie kids coming to the Fillmore and the times that we were in. And so Bill applied for a license, and 27 of the merchants in the area complained about it, because they were also just worried about this influx of kids into the neighborhood, garbage on the streets after the shows. There's always a little bit of that when people attend a large show. And there was a temple next door with a rabbi who also objected to Bill getting a permit. And Bill went out. There was a lot of interchange between the city and Bill and Charles Sullivan. The city began to pressure Charles and threaten to take his permit away if they didn't sort of capitulate to this. Bill and Charles had a night where they must have maybe had a drink or two and bared their souls, and it ended up with Charles Sullivan saying, "I don't care, man, you go ahead and use my permit. Let's go get these guys." And Bill then went out. Bill then went out and talked to every one of those 27 merchants, and also had an altercation with the rabbi. And when it became clear through Bill explaining his history to the rabbi that Bill was a Landsman, was also a Jew and had had a history like that he had had, the rabbi also changed his attitude considerably. And it's a long and convoluted story, but we'll leave it with, sadly, right after Charles had been shot, and they never found out who was responsible for that, Bill did get his license finally in June of 1966. But Bill, everything that I've read, quotes of Bill, and anytime Bill talked about Charles Sullivan, Bill's known to have said that he would have done anything for Charles. That without Charles having been able to stand up, that Bill never would have been able to do what he did.
Well, and it's at the Fillmore where really this mantra of, you know, giving the audience not what it wants, but what it should want starts happening. I was looking through dozens and dozens of playbills of his concerts there, and you have Andy Warhol and his Plastic Inevitable with the Mothers, Lenny Bruce. You have the Byrds, Play the Dutchman by Leroy Jones. And you have the Russian poet Andrei Voznesensky, apologies, Jefferson Airplane, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. So it's a great mix of poetry, theater, multimedia performance, if you wish. And I suspect everyone was always caught by surprise, right? You really didn't know what you will get that night.
Well, you know, B.B. King used to tell the story of the first time he played the Fillmore, and he walked out on stage, and there was an auditorium full of people cheering for him, and all the faces were white. And he said he just about was unable to perform because he'd never seen that in his life before. And he came back afterwards and gave Bill a big hug and said, "Thank you for doing that for me."
And I'm a little bit older than Bob, so I was actually at that Fillmore seeing many of those shows. And, you know, I've always been musically quite eclectic, but I give tribute to Bill for helping me realize that all of those artists, I never would have really maybe grasped onto Miles Davis as early as I did, or Rahsaan Roland Kirk, or, you know, just the story about Andrei Voznesensky coming and playing in front of a Jefferson Airplane audience. And Andrei Voznesensky having some audience of his own there. And the thing that Bill loved was he would observe the two crowds coming together, you know, and he would love to see the little, you know, Russian ladies who all came for Andrei Voznesensky mixing with the kids who were dancing on the floor of the Fillmore. You know, what's better than that?
And then he's giving New York the Fillmore East, right? In 1968, in March, he opens it. So he brings to New York, I don't know, he creates the Church of Rock and Roll. That's that's how I learned to call it. For everyone watching, we welcome any memories you have of the Fillmore East. I know my colleagues, some of them shared some of incredible, great stories with me. So please tell us about, in the Q&A section, tell us about the concert you attended. I'm sure there's a breakfast story around there somewhere, because he was known to give some breakfast after a long night of hearing Allman Brothers jam. And of course, it wouldn't be the Fillmore East without mentioning Janis Joplin, who opened the venue on March 8, 1968, and Joshua Light liquid light shows, which enriched the musical acts for 3 years, and we're fortunate to have projection by Joshua Light Show in our exhibition. Any concerts you attended at the Fillmore East, Bonnie and Bob, or were you more on the?
I did not. We have a fellow on our board, though, that worked with Bill through the entire time and then moved west with Bill and was with all of us and with Bill into the middle 90s. But that's for another curated tour, Cristian.
It's for the special Fillmore East, confidential. So I wanted to move to the Winterland Arena after Bill closes the Fillmore East and the Fillmore West in 1971. Instead of simply retiring and being happy, I just heard him say that in an interview from 1974. He doesn't stop. He continues producing at the Winterland, the former ice skating ring, and you have acts like Stevie Wonder and the Rolling Stones in 1972. And I know, Bob, you have some great stories about those days.
Well, you know, that was the first night I worked at Winterland, was those 4 shows. And I was one of the guys that Jerry Pompili, my mentor, brought in to handle the extra crowds. And the idea was that I was a security person keeping the aisles clear. And in those days, the way you did that is you wore a t-shirt that had in big block letters, it said, please. And underneath it, it said, stay out of the aisles or they'll take our permits away. And you'd walk around and you'd get people's attention that were standing in the aisle, and you'd stand in front of them because they couldn't hear anything you were saying. And you just point to your shirt and they go, oh, and they keep moving along. So I did that during Stevie Wonder's set on the back row of Winterland. And then during intermission, we all filed down and there was a fluorescent yellow stripe painted on the floor that shone in the black lights that were on the ceiling. And that was the center aisle that nobody could stand on. And we kept that clear right up until the Rolling Stones were to go on. And then the 12 security that were there, we all filed in 6 on each side in the front of the audience up against the 5-foot stage, making it so that if anyone wanted to jump on the stage, they had to jump over us. So I was very lucky in being able to be right on the front of the stage for the 4 shows at Winterland. And we all traded places so we could be in different spots in front of different people. And I got to say, for the first time in my life, my ears rang for about a week after that. So it was a special night. I'll never forget it. It made me chase this rock and roll thing for the rest of my life.
What about the famous or infamous New Year's Eve parties that happened in Winterland for, I guess, about 12 years, right? So,
yeah, you know, for a long time, I never got home before dawn on New Year's Day because I was up all night at the Dead shows, and they'd often end about 5 or 6 in the morning. And sometimes we'd serve breakfast to people as they were leaving the show. And I got to tell you that the smiles you would see as you would hand these people that were kind of melting on their way out of the show after 8 hours or 10 hours in this place. And they'd get this warm breakfast burrito, and the smile would be from ear to ear, and you know it would last off into the rest of the year for them. It was just a fantastic feeling.
So Bill was, again, his love for drama, for theater, and I guess, you know, being an actor translates in all these incredible costumes he wore during the New Year's Eve nights when Grateful Dead was playing, right? We have a great example, his Father Time costume from 1988. There's a butterfly costume, a proud bald eagle costume. Am I missing one? I know.
Oh, there's a lot.
And he's
Well,
always
twice at Winterland, he flew in from the back of the building on a lit joint.
Mhm.
The first time it was just a big joint with a roach clip. And then the second time we transformed it because the Columbia Space Shuttle had been inaugurated that year, and we turned it into the USS Columbian that smoked all the way down to the stage. It was pretty spectacular every time.
Now, I heard a story that the Grateful Dead playing during these events, they would always try to, again, dose him with acid. And for every attempt, he would throw more and more balloons at them during the Winterland concerts. And there is this footage of tremendous amount of balloons being lowered on the Grateful Dead. Are you aware, like, were you behind the scenes for?
Well, yeah, they would complain about all the balloons we would hang over the stage. And they said, look, hang the balloons over the audience. Don't hang them over the stage because we have to play. So this became a challenge to my brother Peter and Bill. So, of course, we would fill the audience with more and more balloons every year. But then they would strategically place, because Phil was the biggest complainer. And one year, when the stagehands yanked on the strings from up in the spot booth to release the balloons, not only did they release the balloons, the entire balloon bag with about 300 balloons in it came down and landed right on top of Phil and his amp, making him disappear. And I gotta say, we never heard the end of that one from Phil.
So speaking of the Grateful Dead's relationship with Bill, there are, of course, the 1980 pair of concerts at San Francisco and at Wakefield, and then at the Radio City Music Hall. And I know your brother was involved with designing the iconic posters.
Yeah, my brother was the art director at the time for our company. He did all the scenic art. We were doing the big Day in the Green sets and a lot of posters, and he wasn't necessarily the artist, but he would come up with concepts and work with posters on dealing with these concept. I'm the artist on dealing with these concept posters that Bill wanted. So when the Warfield came up, we had 15 nights in one theater. We'd never done that before, and Bill wanted a special poster. So he asked Peter to find the right artist, and Peter went to Dennis Larkins, who at the time was our scenic poster and a fine artist. He wasn't a poster artist. He used to do sets for the San Francisco Opera and that kind of thing. And Dennis, when we had closed Winterland, we opened up a place across the bay in Oakland called the Oakland Auditorium, which hadn't had concerts allowed since the crowd exited a James Brown concert in 1967 and broke all the windows in downtown Oakland. So concerts had been banned there, and we got them to reopen the place. And at the first Dead show, Peter had Dennis paint these two giant skeletons, a male and a female, which we called Sam and Samantha. And they were on like 30-foot canvas drops that we hung on either side of the stage. Well, Peter and Dennis got together, and the idea was to use Sam and Samantha as iconic protectors of the audience at the Warfield, because we're in this downtown place surrounded by the urban realities. So they came up with this design of the two skeletons leaning on the building, and when the Grateful Dead saw it, they loved it so much that they asked him to please make another one for their run coming up the Radio City Music Hall. So of course they did the same thing with the Radio City Music Hall marquee front and center and the two skeletons leaning against it. Well, it turns out the Radio City marquee is a trademarked art piece that Radio City Music Hall has. And when their brass saw this poster, they flipped out and they slapped $1.5 million lawsuit against the Dead and the artists about, you can't sell this, you can't distribute it, you can't even release it. So after a long discussion and they got nowhere, they had to destroy all the posters. But unfortunately, somehow a few of the posters slipped out. And so they did get out into the underground art world, and it immediately became the most sought after collectible item, which really pleased Dennis Larkins as the poster. It kind of put him in this iconography of artists that he, admired so much, the Rick Griffins and the Mouse and Kellys of the world. And it was only his second poster. So he was thrilled. But then, as it turns out, years later, that poster's been bootlegged more than any other poster out there. And so even if you have an original copy, it's kind of hard to sell nowadays.
The one in our
But
show is
as a small anecdote, if you watch Romancing the Stone, the Michael Douglas, Kathleen Turner movie, when they find the downed smuggler's plane in the jungle with bales of pot, and Michael goes up into the cockpit and he touches the driver and he falls forward, on the back of his flight jacket is the artwork from Radio City. So they reached American iconography with that one.
and New York Historical had its Grateful Dead exhibition. So
That's right, and they created a third in the series with the New York Art Historical Society. So there's 3 posters in that series.
So moving on, I wanted to talk about a big slice of Bill's legacy, which is his work and with humanitarian concerts and producing them. And I know Bob, you worked on quite a few of them. In the exhibition, you get to see and learn about the Live Aid concert, for which he got the MTV Humanitarian Award. A Conspiracy of Hope, Human Rights Now, and then even the concert for peace in Moscow after Americans and the Russians marched from Leningrad to Moscow, right, for denuclearization. And you were there, right, for all of them, most of them.
Well, I was at the Moscow concert, and for Amnesty International, I wasn't on the tour. I did San Francisco, but when the tour wanted to go to San Jose, Costa Rica, and New Delhi, India, which were 2 very politically important places to go, there were no local promoters to help promote the show. So the tour was about to drop those 2 sites when Bill said, "Don't worry, I'll be the local promoter in those 2 cities. Don't worry, I'll cover it." So the next thing I knew, my brother and I were flying off to New Delhi and San Jose to make arrangements to do these concerts in places where nothing has ever happened like that before. So they were rather difficult to produce, but it was very rewarding, because when we left New Delhi, when we got there, there were about 50 members of Amnesty International. When we left, there were 30,000.
I wanted to, we're almost running out of time, but I wanted to hear Bill talk a little about the freedom of expression. And he talks about this in relationship to what he did in the 1960s and the music that happened then. And I think it's a really...
Freedom of expression is the almighty hold for me, that we have the right to express ourselves. And when you extend that opportunity, you're dealing with power. Raw, awesome power. The rock and roll world in the 60s became aware of that. The artists in the city gradually became aware that at any given time they could raise $100, $1,000, $5,000, buy a bus, save a radio station, send a youth symphony to Europe, start a legal organization for the oppressed. That had never existed before. On an ongoing basis, that had never existed before, and it might never exist again. And it has continued to be that. In 1985, Live Aid affected the world, and most people in the media were amazed at what the awesome power of rock and roll was, the extent of it. They were 20 years late.
So, any thoughts about such powerful statement?
Well, you know, the very first benefit I worked for Bill was the Bob Freed poster artist benefit at Winterland in 1972, I think, or 73. And I used to get $25 a night when I worked. And that night I got $30. And I went to Bill after the show and I said, "Hey, how come I got a raise?" And he goes, "Well, I do a lot of benefits. And when we do benefits, we have all these special guests and arrangements that we have around the benefit to to promote their cause, and it makes you guys work a lot harder on benefits. So I always pay you guys a little more because I don't want you to have to work for my dream. I want you to believe in it too.
We got a question from one of our viewers. What was Bill Graham's secret to getting so many amazing acts on the lineup for concerts like Live Aid and the Amnesty Tour? What was his secret weapon?
You know, I've been thinking about that a lot because I can't help it. Since Bill has been gone, there are times when we are all struggling with one thing or another. I think all of us on this Zoom call can certainly connect to that right now. And there are many times in the last too many years that I have thought, damn, I wish Bill was here. Bill, just when he focused on something like that, he knew to just marshal the energy, and he would pick up that phone. You know, he had more than one phone in his office, even in the early days when people didn't have such a thing. And he would just be, benevolently relentless when it came to that. And I think that the way that he was able to get yeses out of people who were often asked for them way too much was that they had the experience of knowing that if Bill was involved in this, that what he was saying, he was going to try to, that they were going to attempt to do, that it was likely that the whole thing would be put together properly. They would be supported in the way that they needed to be supported as artists, that he appreciated that they were giving their talent and their time to things, and that in the end, the goal was going to be reached. And there were very few people that I think commanded that sort of respect and confidence from artists, because he didn't lie to them. He didn't mess with them, and he had that history of having been, sometimes irascible, sometimes pretty forceful, but honest in his attempts.
In October 1991, Bill was taken suddenly from us by the tragic helicopter accident, and then a concert was produced in his memory, Laughter, Love and Music. And from what I know, Bob, you were present at that event.
Yeah, it turned out to be the biggest concert I ever worked on in my career. We had over 500,000 people come through the park that day. The aerial photos of the polo grounds shows the entire polo grounds full of people. And then if you look at all the empty spaces between the trees spreading out, every empty space is full of people. So, all under the trees were full of people too. It was a huge crowd. Everybody came to pay their respects, and there wasn't a single problem. At the end of the day, everyone went home and the place was clean. So it was just one of those special days where everyone came out for Bill. Robin Williams did this amazing channeling of Bill and took us all on this word trip that really just exemplified how much people loved Bill, the artists included. So it was a very special day.
This slideshow, when I put it together, I thought it would be only fitting to end it with a song that I guess, Bonnie, you were the one to tell me when we're installing the show that this is the only song Bill kind of knew. It's I Love You Much Too Much by Carlos Santana. And it's something that he learned from Santana, and then it's something that Santana played during one of the memorial services.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
No. I just wanted to play this Bill humming to us this song.
Should I fill in a little bit before you do so?
Sure. We have some.
What this actually is Bill and his partner David Rubinson were producing a Carlos Santana record, and Bill knew this. It's actually the melody to, I think, a Yiddish folk tune, and Bill knew this melody and he wanted to have Carlos try to play it. He thought Carlos would like it. So Bill sang him the melody in the studio, and David Rubinson was in the master studio and secretly taped it so that we had Bill on tape. And years later, David Rubinson pressed up about 100 or 200 of them as singles and put them out as Bill Graham, I Love You Much Too Much. So that's the
Okay.
origin.
Thanks for clarifying. Well, here is Bill.
Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da da da
So I listened to that quite a few times when I was working on this exhibition. We had a few more questions from our viewers. One of them had to do with the stage at Winterland. Is it true that the stage was at one point on one side of the Winterland arena, and then it was moved to the opposite end? And Bob, did you help move it, if it's true?
Actually, that first show I worked there, the Rolling Stones, it was, Winterland was a rectangle. And on one of the long sides, facing the short width of the building, that's where they had the stage. So that way, most people were closer to the stage. But it was difficult because, the people on the sides couldn't hear as well because they were off to the side so much. So eventually Bill moved the stage to the end of the arena, so he was playing the long ways, and that's how the arena closed. But over the years, he did switch back from either being on the side to the end, and it did that a couple of times over time.
And then we had it's a common question. Why did the Fillmores close in 1971 after opening 3 years earlier in 1968? And I know there is a great interview with Bill in 74 in which he talks about how unhappy he was at the time and he was not feeling fulfilled, but as the music industry grew. But I wanted to know both your takes on it. If you know any other secrets behind the closings.
On a practical level, the only thing that I will throw in is that in 1971 and in the few years leading up to 1971, being someone bi-coastal was a lot more complicated than it is now. We once made just kind of as a joke, a map of all of Bill's air travel over like a year's period of time. And there were so many lines on this map that you couldn't even decipher it any longer. And I do remember, Bill talking about and also reading about just the exhaustion of trying to be doing both coasts at the same time. And Bob, I'm sure you have some other insights on it.
38 shows or something a year, you're saying, or flights.
Crazy.
No, that was the thing he always said to me was that he was having a hard time keeping up with it physically. Just the back and forth of it all was a very difficult proposition for him. And plus the artists were getting agents that were demanding more money and bigger percentages of the ticket. And it was making so that these small ballrooms or theaters he was running, it was difficult to make money. Some of these acts could try going to a nightclub, and with the alcohol revenue, they could make more money than they could play, playing a big 1,000-seat, a couple 1,000-seat arenas. So he was, the economics were changing and his life was changing, and he chose to focus just on San Francisco. And that's when we went to the bigger building, Winterland, where you could actually still make a little money. And with the Fillmores were just too small. They couldn't keep up with the demands of the artists and the audiences.
Well, we have reached the end of our presentation. Bob and Bunny, thank you so much for being here, for
That's fun.
providing so much insight. It's always great to learn from you.
Great.
And thank you everyone for your participation and for your support of the New York Historical Society. Please follow us on social media. And if you'd like to learn more about Bill Graham, Robert Greenfield's book, Bill Graham Presents My Life Inside Rockin' Out, makes for a great summer read. We are taking a brief pause from Curator Confidential. Stay tuned for announcements about new content and virtual programs from curators this fall. And we also hope to welcome you to the New York Historical soon.
Yeah.
Yay. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.